All right, we are in Daniel chapter 8 this morning, and before we begin, we'll have a word of prayer. Daniel chapter 8. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful to you for your word and the scriptures and the opportunities we have to study it. We're thankful to you, Father, that you have made your will known to us in so many ways. And we are especially thankful for the gift of prophecy and the fact that you are the Lord of history. You see all things. You know what's going to happen before it happens. You know the rise and the fall of nations. And even though we do not know these things, Father, even though we face many times of insecurity and uncertainty and doubt, we know, Father, that you hold the future in your hands and that you are capable of protecting your people through any and every circumstance. And even if the future may seem bleak and dark, we know that you have promised to preserve us through it. You promised to bring us to everlasting life with you and your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in His name we pray. Amen. All right, Daniel chapter 8. And I mentioned several times that we've been in that a good chunk of Daniel is in Aramaic, and that was chapters 2 through 7. Now, finally, Daniel reverts back to the Hebrew language in chapter 8, and the remainder of the book was written in Hebrew. But chapter 8 and 9, 10, 11, 12 all continue what we started in chapter 7, which is this kind of apocalyptic type style, these visions. There's going to be a lot of symbolism. There's going to be a lot of perhaps confusing aspects to it. And what happens in Daniel chapter 8 is Daniel has another vision in the reign of Belshazzar. And in some ways, this chapter is a little easier than chapter 7 because the angelic interpreter kind of gives us some of the answers to some of the specifics. So what I would like to do is I would like to go ahead and get a volunteer to read the first 14 verses of Daniel chapter 8. All right. Now, as we said a few classes ago, when we were talking about the vision in chapter 7, the most important thing to do in an apocalyptic vision is to see the vision first. And, just understand what it is, understand what the details are, and then after we've fully gotten what the details are, then we come back to interpreting what they mean. So, how would you describe this vision? Who's in it? Yeah, who's in the vision? Great and powerful people. Well, what does Daniel see? Okay, all right. He sees a ram. Yeah, they do represent big and powerful peoples. We're getting to that, but we got to get to what he saw first. All right. So we have a ram, 2 horns, and we have a goat with 1 horn, and the horn comes between its eyes, so it would have looked like a shaggy unicorn goat, as I stated at the beginning of this class. Also, he's floating above the ground, so it's a flying shaggy unicorn goat. You didn't know that flying shaggy unicorn goat was in the Bible, did you? No, but it is. And now you can tell everybody. Have you ever read the passage in the Bible about the flying shaggy unicorn goat? Okay, so the ram with 2 horns. Anything we can say about those horns in particular? All right, one longer than the other. All right. Okay, it's a dominating. No one can stop it. Any other details that kind of come up? West, north, and south. West, north, south. Not eastward. We'll get. Well, yeah, we'll get to that actually. I think that. It's not super. Yeah. Well, okay. All right. Anything else? Did we mostly cover it, or? All right. Let's talk about the goat. All right. What can we say about this goat? Okay, he's got the 1 horn between the eyes. What? Yeah, in the middle, between the eyes. Right. What can we say about this goat? All right. Attacked ram. Well, yeah, kind of 2 separate things going on here. He attacks the ram first, and he defeats the ram. Then the horn is broken. It doesn't appear to be broken in the battle per se. Right, horn broken in when mighty, when he was mighty. All right. What else? All right, so 4 horns, 4 conspicuous horns. Right, so you have that kind of going on again. All right, kind of the compass, the whole 4 points of the compass deal. What else? Another really conspicuous detail. One tiny detail, I guess. Okay. Little horn. And the little horn does some bad things. Goes south. Yeah. Say again? All right. Yeah, invades beautiful land. All right. So trampled stars, exalted self, beautiful land. Talk about that expression. And one other thing I think kind of important to note. What else does this little horn do? Very specific. He removed the sacrifice, correct. And that's going to be important. Yeah. Sacrifice, hurled truth. How do you do that? Hurl truth down to the ground. How do you depict that visually? I'm just trying to figure out what Daniel saw when he saw that. Maybe. I mean, it's interesting because, he describes what he sees. He hurled truth down to the ground. Okay, all right, we'll make a movie about that. He removed the sacrifice. How long? 2,300 days? What is it? Anybody else have something other than days? Evenings and mornings is what it literally says, which could be days, although there's a big argument about that. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, so this basically, I think, covers it, unless anybody has anything else. What Daniel saw. Now, okay, so we described the ram. How powerful is he? Beating Ares. He's beating everybody. Okay. What about the goat? How does he measure up against the ram? Yeah, well, the goat turns out to be stronger. Right. And of course, the goat's large horn gets broken eventually, yeah. The little horn, we talked about the little horn's doing. Particularly, the little horn does a lot of bad stuff, like exalting himself and trampling stars. But one of the big features is removing the sacrifice, of which Daniel asks, how long, and it's 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay. Now, I guess the next question we have to ask is, who are the ram and the goat? Well, yeah, and this is one of the great features of Daniel 8, is Daniel actually tells you who these people are. No. The answer is no. Medo-Persia. The ram is Medo-Persia, and the goat is Greece. And we know this because it says that in Daniel 8, in verse 20 and 21. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is its first king. So, yay! The one time in apocalyptic literature where they tell us the answer. Most of the time they speak cryptically, it's this really scary king or something like that, and you have to sort of put pieces together. And sometimes the pieces aren't that hard to put together. This is like the one time where they give us the answer. So I think we should take a moment to appreciate that. Daniel has this vision in the third year of Belshazzar, so Babylon's still in power at the time. And the book... and even though the book is shifted in language, he says that this vision is subsequent to the vision he just had in chapter 7, which... he's in the citadel of Susa by the Ulai Canal, which that's not in Babylon, actually. Susa was about 230 miles east of Babylon. And Susa was a special place because it was the winter residence of the Persian kings. That's where Nehemiah served Artaxerxes. That's where Esther and Mordecai lived. The Persians were weird. They had 3 capitals because they couldn't agree on a single one, so they kind of compromised. So you have Susa, which was the springtime palace. You have Ecbatana, which was the Median capital, and you have Parsakata, which was the Persian capital. They just kind of fluctuated back and forth. Daniel, he sees the 2 horns. It says that both horns were long, but one horn is longer than the other, and we didn't write it on the board, but the longer one came up last. The argument goes that, the Medians were older, but the Persians were stronger, hence the longer came up last. That's frequently what the 2 horns are interpreted to mean. The ram, he butts in those 3 directions, north, west, and south, but why not east? Well, no. That's where India is. Yeah, essentially that's what it was. And if you look at the map, here's Persia. They go north, they go west, they go south, but they don't go east because east is where they're coming from. So all of their invasions track this way. Most of their invading seems to go westward. This is the map. It is included in the packet I gave you, but Persia starts in the east and moves westward. Although they did do some stuff in India. In fact, when I go to India, the brethren sometimes point out to me the one time that India is mentioned in the entire Bible is in Esther chapter 1. And I also think in Esther chapter 8 or 9 or something too. When it's talking about the extent of the Persian Empire. So that's what we're looking at there. No one, in verse 4, it says that he did as he pleased and magnified himself. There was no one who could stand before him. There was none to rescue from his hand. What kind of language? Where do we see that kind of thing? You got to be talking a little metaphorically because rams don't have hands. It's the thing about being rescued from someone's hand is you need hands. But what does that language mean? No one could rescue from his hand. Where do we see other people described that way? Who can rescue you from my hand? Right, that's true. Yes, it's metaphorical for power. Which, to be fair, my version actually says none could rescue from his power. And that's what the hand means. It's represents the action, the power. There's a lot of languages that do that actually. Where the word hand is somehow cognate with the verb to do. That's not true in Hebrew, but it is still that idea is there. It sounds. Does it sound like anybody we've talked about in the book of Daniel? Who can deliver you out of my hand? King was Nebuchadnezzar, right? And when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said that they weren't going to worship the statue, one of the things Nebuchadnezzar says is, "What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Chapter 3, verse 15. And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond and say, "Well, if our God, whom we serve, is willing to deliver us, He will deliver us out of your hand." It's the same kind of expression that you see. You see other people in Scripture say things like that. Sennacherib says it in Isaiah 36. Who can deliver you out of my hand? No one can deliver you out of my hand. You should just surrender to me. And of course, God says it about Himself in Deuteronomy 32, in verse 29. God has the power to back it up. It's a frequent boast of kings in the ancient world. No one can deliver me out of no one can deliver you out of my hand. And this is what is said about the goat. No one can rescue from his power. No one can save from his hand. He does as he pleases. He magnifies himself. Now that is language that we're going to see. We actually see it later on in chapter 8, describing the little horn. He magnifies himself. And we're going to see it in chapter 11 when describing the Greek kings. That they did as they pleased. They did whatever they wanted. Nobody could stop them. No one can stop us. We're too powerful. We can do whatever we want and you can't say boo about it. Well, what does that mean? Of course, in the end, this goat who magnifies himself, no one can deliver out of his hand, and he does whatever he wants. What happens to him? Does he keep doing whatever he pleases? There is a judgment. He doesn't do what he pleases forever. He only does what he pleases as long as God pleases. It's splatted, destroyed, and that's where the goat comes in. Goat comes from where? Which direction? from the west, which geographically Greek was to the west of Persia, and everybody else for that matter. In fact, when you see these directions, north, east, south, and west, a lot of times from the vision perspective, they're being spoken about from Israel's perspective. Persia was east of Israel. Greece was west of Israel. Sometimes they talk about being invaded from the north, and the reason why was because even though their enemies lived in the east, the enemies often took a northward invasion route and came from the north, because if they just cut straight across, they'd have to go through the desert, and that's not fun. There's no water. They take the Fertile Crescent route because that's easier and safer. Alright, so Ghost comes from the west, over the surface of the earth. He doesn't touch the ground. Why doesn't he touch the ground? Is there a reason? He can fly. Anybody want to take a guess? Maybe. Well, we could just... if you see a goat running, and the goat's not touching the ground, he's moving fast. Very quickly. Which, it just may just simply be a reference to speed, how fast the Greeks conquered everything. The goat has a conspicuous horn, literally a horn of vision between his eyes. It was a very large horn. The goat runs at the ram. He strikes the ram. He shatters his horn, and the ram has no more power to withstand him. So, goodbye, ram. It's gone. Ram gets rammed out. He gets trampled, just like we saw with the fourth beast in Daniel 7. And no one can rescue from the ram's hand, but in verse 7, no one can rescue the ram from the goat's hand. His power. And how different is the goat from the ram? Not much. There's not a lot of difference between these two guys, actually. One's a goat, one's a ram. They have different numbers of horns, but we find out with the goat that that's a pretty malleable thing, the number of horns he can have. Yeah, so there's no... Right, exactly. Same song, third verse, right? That's what this is. The goat isn't much different from the ram. It says in verse 8, he magnifies himself exceedingly, just like the ram did. He exalts himself. He does all the same stuff. And when the goat gets mighty, though, his horn gets broken and replaced by 4 conspicuous horns. Mark, you have something? Yeah? Well, I don't know if Jesus was referring specifically to this, but this is a common idea. This is a common idea in Scripture, though. The idea that God exalts the humble and humbles the exalted. Yeah. That's true. That's an interesting point to bring out. In chapter 7, these big vicious beasts that eat everything, and they're, unstoppable. But here in this chapter, it's, 2 animals that aren't generally considered very fierce. Ram and goat. They were mostly slaughtered for sacrifices. Oh, we're so high and mighty, and it's like, no, you're basically livestock. That's what mankind does, isn't it? He exalts himself, but in God's eyes, what is he? He's just like another beast. It's like Nebuchadnezzar all over again. You think you're so great? Go eat grass like an ox for a while, and then come back and tell me how great you are. Let's see how great you are when I've stripped you of all of your power. There's some of that going on here too. The goat, he becomes mighty, his horn gets broken, he gets replaced by 4 horns, conspicuous horns. we get this little horn. Yes? Yes. Yeah, it's in Proverbs. What was it? Hold on. I know I read it the other day, so it can't be... I'm trying to remember where in Proverbs I was when I read it. The problem with Proverbs is that there's not a lot of context to index it out. I don't know. It was something to the effect of, a woman lacking sense. Oh, a beautiful woman lacking sense is like a gold ring and a pig's snout, or something like that. I don't know what that has to do with Daniel 8, but I mean, it's. Yeah, it kind of like that, I mean, it's right. All right. So out of the four horns, a really small horn emerges, which is large, points toward the south, towards the beauty, which the beautiful land. What do we think the beautiful land is? Probably Israel. It's a cryptic reference to Israel. It gets, and it comes up again in chapter 11. In fact, Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 are the only chapters in the Bible to refer to Israel this way. And so that's kind of interesting too. There's a lot of connections between Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 through 12, and we're going to note those eventually. But there's a lot of similarities between those two visions. The little horn, we've seen the little horn before. That's a figure we've seen before anyway. Where did we last see the little horn? Where did we last see that image used, I should say? Okay, so there was a little horn in chapter 7. There's a little horn in chapter 8. And the big question that everybody asks is the little horn in chapter 7 the same as the little horn in chapter 8? People are not agreed on this. So, we can be pretty certain that in this chapter it's a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes. Although he's not, unlike Greece and Medo-Persia, he is not named, but there's several really obvious pointers that make it clear that he's the guy they're talking about here. Although they wouldn't have known that in Daniel's day because Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't born yet. But that's the question and this is one of the evidences sometimes people bring up for renumbering the beasts in Daniel 7 so that beast number 4 is the Greeks because they want the little horn in chapter 7 to be Antiochus Epiphanes so that the little horn's the same in both chapters and they can tie this whole thing up with a nice neat bow. I can sort of see the appeal of that interpretation. It makes everything simpler. But are they the same? Why not? Okay. All right. And I think that this is one of those instructive lessons here. It's certainly why use the same image one chapter to the next? And I mean, Daniel probably expected us to see the similarity. The Lord probably expected us to see the similarity. Why is there a similarity if they're not the same? Okay. The end result is still the same. Mark? Yes. It does. What happened? By power and all. History, yeah, exactly. History tends to repeat itself. That's the idea that we're getting at here. even if the little horns are different, they're definitely the same kind of person. You look at it. If we see, so if we're going to see the fourth beast in chapter 7 is Rome, then you can't make them the exact same guy. But how many little horns have there been throughout history? Lots and lots of little horns throughout history. Men of lawlessness, men who make themselves out to be God but are really servants of Satan. If you read 2 Thessalonians 2 and Paul talks about the man of lawlessness, everybody's like, ooh, some specific end-time type figure. But the point that Paul's making in that passage isn't about a specific figure. It's, look, this evil still exists. That's why the resurrection hasn't happened yet. Because Satan's servants are still at work. And that's the message of human history. There's always going to be a man of lawlessness until Christ returns and reveals him, exposes him for who he is, and ultimately destroys him. That's the consistent message of Scripture. Whoever they are, God wins. God will ultimately destroy them, triumph over them. And their power over God's people is not permanent, nor is their dominion in this world permanent. And that's, I think, the message that Daniel 8 has for us today. It's not just, it is a specific prophecy about some very specific people, but the principle doesn't stop with those events. It's a principle that exists for all time. God will overthrow whatever ruler exalts himself and makes a little horn out of himself. You look at verse 10, the little horn grows up to the heavens and knocks some of the stars down to trample them. Ooh, scary. Now, what is... does he literally invade heaven? No. Right. Why? If he doesn't literally invade heaven, why does Daniel describe him this way? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Extend our reach to the stars. There you go. They couldn't literally invade heaven, but he sure wants to. It's Isaiah 14. It's like the king of Babylon says, "Oh, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will reach up to the stars of heaven." God says, "No, you're going to be thrown down to earth. You're going to be cast down to earth, star of the morning, son of the dawn." This little horn makes itself equal with, verse 11, the prince of the host, the commander of the host. He removes this regular sacrifice. And now that is a reference to an actual event that happened. In the 25th of the month of Chislev, in 167 BC, Antiochus IV outlawed the morning and evening sacrifice because the Jews were transgressing against him and he didn't like them. He was mad at the Jews for some reason. So he outlawed the morning and evening sacrifice. That's actually, there's an intertestamental work that mentions it. In 1 Maccabees 159, the 5 and 20th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. He outlawed the regular sacrifice, and instead he turned the temple of God in Jerusalem into a temple for Zeus, where you would sacrifice pigs on the altar instead. Antiochus persecuted the Jews. He outlawed the Torah. He tried to have copies of it burned. He tried to compel them to violate the food laws. He was trying to get rid of the religion. And, in terms of numbers, historically, the Holocaust had killed more Jews than most other events. And you just count by the numbers. But it was in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes that the Jewish culture came closest to being completely wiped out. Because that's what kind of guy this was. And that's who this little horn is. This boastful little horn, how much success is he given here? Verse 12, he will actually be allowed to succeed in some of these endeavors. He will actually be allowed to prosper. Wow. It's just like we saw in chapter 1. God gave Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. He sent his people into exile. He lets this happen to his people too. The little horn's a lot like Nebuchadnezzar. Tearing down the sanctuary, getting rid of the sacrifice, exalting himself. But all of these things, they're just temporary. They're just gifts from God. He hurls truth to the ground. In 1 Maccabees 1, 56 and 57, when they had rent in pieces the book of the law which they found, they burnt them with fire, and wheresoever was found with any the book of the testament, or if any consented to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. You had a copy of the law of Moses, you could be killed. I mean, you see that kind of persecution now? I mean, people complain about their religious liberties being infringed upon, but when is the last time you know somebody, here who was killed because they had a Bible? I mean, in other countries you see that kind of thing. Well, count your blessings, I guess. Count your blessings where you're at. Everybody wants to. Oh dear, yeah. Right. Right. And then, of course, in part of the vision, one holy one cries out to another, which these are probably angels. How long? And the answer is 2,300 evenings and mornings, which nobody agrees on what this refers to. So I will just give you the rundown of the different views. Some people think it refers to 2,300 actual days, which would be just shy of 7 years. And typically, I guess they would fix that from 171 to 164 BC. Other people say, well, 2,300 evenings and mornings, that's half and half. We'll go 1150 evenings, 1150 mornings adds up to 2,300. And so that would make it slightly less than 3.5 years. Sounds familiar number. And which that number is roughly how long Antiochus actually defiled the temple for. And so from 167 to 164 BC, when they finally restored it. And when they rededicated the temple, they have a feast every year to commemorate their rededication of the temple called the Feast of Dedication. It's mentioned in the New Testament in John chapter 10, but it is more popularly known by the Hebrew word for dedication, Hanukkah. So that's the story of how Hanukkah came to be, was they were rededicating the temple after Antiochus had defiled it. And, of course, other people think, no, it's a symbolic number, although exactly what it symbolizes, nobody really knows, because it's hard to come up with the symbolic significance of 2,300 if it falls short. Some people say, well, it falls just short of 7 years, so Antiochus is a little less than perfect, a 666 instead of a 777. Maybe. The symbolism's not that obvious. Right. Yeah. How long? Well, I mean, it's the same expression. Yeah. No, that's and I think that the point is, he tells you how long it's going to last before we even get to the persecution. Meaning, God knew this was coming. He knew how long it would last, and He knew when it would be over. And He did have an endpoint plan for it. So, yeah, you got those types of things too. God knows exactly what He's doing. Do you think Antiochus planned for it to only be 2,300 evenings and mornings? No. That wasn't his plan. His plan was to keep this going forever. He wanted to be the ruler of the world. But that didn't work out so hot for him. And we'll see more of that as we go on. Man, we're almost out of time. We haven't even gotten to the interpretation part, verses 15 through 27. Very quickly. All right, so Gabriel appears to Daniel. I'll start in verse 15. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of Ulai, and he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing. When he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand upright. He said, Behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. In the latter period of their rule, when their transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree, and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. And through his shrewdness he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. And he will magnify himself in his heart. He will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes. But he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and the mornings which has been told is true. But keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Then I, Daniel, was exhausted, sick for days. I got up again and carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it. Now, there's a lot more points. Yeah? None to explain his vision. Even though the guy explained it. Yeah. I mean, this is... Right. Now, we're out of time. We're going to talk... There's still a lot more to unpack here, and we're going to get into it next time. On Thursday night, we'll finish up chapter 8, hopefully, Lord willing. Thank you for your time.